Last year, I had a comment in relation to the Post Office videos that said they've lost their moral compass. And that was a comment in relation to the behaviour of Post Office and Fujitsu executives. I think it's a really nice summary of the executives' behaviour, but it begs some questions like, what is your moral compass? And can you lose it? But I also want to talk about something those executives told us they had conveniently lost when they appeared at the inquiry, which was their recollection of particular events, and events that particularly implicated them in the scandal. So I want to look at that too, because there's something interesting that connects those two things, and it surfaced just before Christmas when a document appeared that well and truly skewered those executives.
I was 19 when I got sent to prison. It was the worst of the worst. I got sent to Holloway Prison, and I saw stuff that nobody should experience ever.
Tracy Felstead speaking last year, just one of thousands of totally innocent sub-postmasters falsely prosecuted by the Post Office and Fujitsu on the basis of two colossal lies. First, their Horizon computer system was reliable. Second, it wasn't possible to centrally alter the accounts of sub-postmasters. But tonight we reveal a single document which blows apart those two lies, which the Post Office and Fujitsu covered up for decades.
So that was Channel 4 reporting on this, one of a number of news channels that picked up the story. And to summarise, that document, the contract between the Post Office and Fujitsu, showed that they were not only aware of serious bugs, defects and errors in the Horizon system, but also that remote access into branch accounts was possible and planned for, contradicting years of claims they'd made in court proceedings and press releases and so on. Now, I'll put the link to the Channel 4 report, and I'll also put a direct link to the contract in the description box so you can see it for yourself. Now, if you look at pages 17 and 13 of that contract, it'll show you something quite interesting. Page 17 shows how Fujitsu and the Post Office agreed a system of compensation to the Post Office for the errors the Horizon system made. So both parties were clearly aware that the system made errors. And page 13 tells us about the remote access that meant that Fujitsu could change Post Office branch accounts remotely with the knowledge and the permission, and only with the permission of the Post Office executive, and without the knowledge and permission of the sub-postmasters running those Post Office branches. That contract reveals the smoking gun to the scandal. It was the thing that many sub-postmasters argued was there, but that the Post Office and Fujitsu claimed was not, and the courts believed the Post Office and Fujitsu, and so sub-postmasters ended up being convicted of fraud and theft, which wrecked so many of their lives and the lives of their families. So did the executives at the Post Office and at Fujitsu lose their moral compass when they chose not to disclose that contract to the courts? And why didn't they just destroy all the copies of that contract when the scandal broke and thus cover their tracks? Well, let's deal with the moral compass thing first. People don't lose their moral compass, they recalibrate it, and they end up doing the wrong thing because their sense of right and wrong becomes distorted. They think they're still doing the right thing, but they're not. And this shift usually happens slowly and usually through the effects of social pressure, such as the influence of the surrounding culture, whether that's the broad culture, like society, or a microculture, like a workplace environment. A culture provides us with the rules, rituals, and norms that shape our behaviour. And those rules, rituals, and norms are shaped by broad historical factors. But in microcultures, they're more directly shaped by those who have power and authority in the setting. And if those folk in authority have a poorly calibrated moral compass, well, the effects can be catastrophic. But what might a well-calibrated moral compass look like? Well, it might have these qualities. It might point people to act wisely, seeing beyond personal impulses and self-interest, being thoughtful, using judgement, humility, and perspective, and learning from others and from history to work towards the long-term good of us all. It might point them also to act nobly, acting with principle and honour, even when it's hard, even when it involves personal sacrifice, being courageous in promoting the dignity and care for others. It might point them to act with empathy, understanding and valuing others, understanding and valuing their feelings, their thoughts and experiences, so that the decisions they make are shaped by compassion, not cold abstraction. And it might point to them acting selflessly, putting others' needs ahead of their own, acting with generosity and without seeking personal reward for what they do. What happens when that compass gets recalibrated to take someone in a bad direction? Well, they might replace wisdom with wantonness, reckless impulses, overriding sound judgment, acting irresponsibly and unreasonably. They might replace noble acts with narcissism, self-absorption and vanity, putting themselves at the centre and treating others as pawns to manipulate. Empathy might give way to egotism. They pretend to help you when they're just helping themselves. They might replace selfless acts with ones that are self-serving. Their personal entitlement and personal gain outweighing any interest they might have had in promoting fairness and justice. You think of those executives at the Post Office and at Fujitsu who were exposed at the inquiry. Also, you could think of some politicians too, and some lawyers. You could think about a lot of people, actually. I think that's what their moral compass ended up looking like. That after they'd recalibrated it, after they'd dug themselves deep in to defend a crappy piece of software called Horizon. There are two really common forms of moral recalibration that show up in modern life that are a result of those strong cultural forces. First, technical proficiency replaces moral judgment. This one comes from cultures and organisations that are dominated by bureaucratic systems. And these systems have four key qualities. One, they're hierarchical. Workers are told what to do by their supervisors. Two, there's a high degree of specialism and isolation. Specific people work on a small slice of a large process, and often on their own, or maybe in a small team, and the task they must do is often narrowly scoped. 3, people are given clear rules and procedures that need to be followed to do their work. And 4, copious amounts of records are kept to ensure that supervisors and the higher management can track what's been done, how quickly it's been done, and how well it's been done. In a bureaucratic system, the goal is to follow procedure, not ethics. That's why at the inquiry, we so often heard witnesses from the Post Office and Fujitsu saying that they'd just been doing their job and they felt they'd done a good job. They seemed genuinely confused as to why someone like Mr. Beer appeared to disagree with them. And that's because the focus of those witnesses was on being technically good at what they were doing, and Mr. Beer and the team at the inquiry were focused on whether what they had done had been morally good. Now, the second broad cultural influence is hedonism replacing humanism. Hedonism is that shift from doing good to feeling good. So pleasure, comfort, self-gratification all start to outweigh things like dignity, empathy, and responsibility. And this most commonly happens under the broad cultural influence of consumer capitalism. Here, desire is promoted as the fundamental human drive. We're told to desire the thing that makes us happy, and that thing that makes us happy is consumption. The opportunity to buy more stuff, and that stuff will make us feel better about ourselves and make us look better to other people. That's the promise, anyway. And businesses spend billions trying to link identity and status to the stuff that they sell so as to encourage us to buy it. Consumption becomes the thing that ensures our happiness. That's what we're led to believe. And psychology, unfortunately, has joined in on this. Certain parts of psychology, positive psychology being one dominant one. So they promote this idea of, things like treat yourself, be kind to yourself, look after yourself. And there's a pattern to those messages we're getting. It's all about you, as if no one else should matter. And that's the thing that can lead to that immorality, if our obsession with our own happiness does harm to others. And if that happens, that's the point we might be tempted to recalibrate our moral compass to convince ourselves and others that what we're doing is right so that we can carry on doing it. So those are two broad cultural forces that pull at us. And if they pull at those in positions of power and authority, and those people don't push back, but just recalibrate their sense of right and wrong instead, well, that's when we're all in trouble. And this is where professional ethics comes in and why professional ethics matter. To promote noble, wise, empathetic, and selfless conduct in those who occupy those positions of power and authority. Because when those in authority drift towards immoral behaviour, the organisation they lead rots. You know the saying, a fish rots from the head. So a CEO of an organisation, they're behaving badly, the whole organisation can end up stuffed. And a CEO of an organisation isn't paid big bucks because they're way more skilled and way more talented than the rest of us. They're not. They're paid the big bucks because they're expected to behave better than the rest of us, and they're supposed to carry more responsibility than the rest of us. And if they fail to set and maintain strong ethical norms in their organisation, they're supposed to be culpable for any harm that results. Those executives at the Post Office and Fujitsu didn't lose their moral compass, they recalibrated it to accommodate their personal wants and needs. The Post Office and Fujitsu ended up headed by a bunch of self-serving narcissists. Now, let's get to that other thing. The thing that they didn't lose. That document. That contract. The contract that might well prove to be their undoing. The question here is, they'd lost or recalibrated their moral compass so they could do bad things. Why didn't they do another bad thing and just shred the contract? They did a good job when it came to losing their personal recollection of events. Why didn't they just purposefully also lose that contract too? Why didn't they shred it before the inquiry began? Before those inquiry folk got their hands on it. Were they just stupid? Or was there something else going on? People at the post office did try to cover their tracks. the shredding of documents, the scrapping of minutes of meetings and so on. So at the inquiry, we heard how John Scott, the head of security, ordered minutes to be destroyed or minutes not to be kept when Horizon's technical problems came up for discussion. I'll put a link to Nick Wallace's article on this in the description box if you want the full story on that. He did a really good job of reporting on that. But here's the thing. Shredding documents doesn't work. In senior management, you should always assume that everything leaks. If you're doing something you fear might cast you in a bad light, you should assume that sooner or later a light will shine on it. So why? Why are organisations so leaky like that? Well, it's partly because most of our social institutions, especially the public ones, our public institutions, are deeply bureaucratic, and bureaucracies, as we covered earlier, have an almost obsessive commitment to record keeping. So many records get created and kept that it becomes practically impossible to destroy them all. Emails, reports, logs, notes, minutes. There's a whole cacophony of written records. Some of it formal, some of it informal, like people's personal diaries. But the real story goes much deeper. Institutions aren't just document repositories. They're not information systems, they're made up of people. They're social systems. And social systems are woven and fluid because people are interconnected, they talk to each other, and they move around. And they move around a lot. People move between teams, between departments, and move into and out of the organisation as a whole. And that movement changes the nature of the information the organisation holds because it changes the social context that wraps around it. Something that once looked banal can suddenly look significant when a different set of eyes lands on it. A document that once carried unspoken threats about what would happen if it was shared with others, it's marked private, don't share this thing, well, that can become unmoored and free to circulate once the person who issued those threats is gone. When the person who tried to bury a piece of information leaves an organisation, that information often rises back to the surface. And yes, organisations have confidentiality clause and internal legal restrictions designed to keep information locked down irrespective of the movement of staff, but those mechanisms usually just slow the flow. They rarely stop it. And that's mostly because of two things. First, there are more decent people around than you might expect. People who never recalibrated their moral compass and will speak up when they see something wrong. And second, even if you manage to choke off the flow of written records, most information isn't written down. Most information isn't written. It's spoken. And we forget how much of what we know lives in conversations, not in documents. Most of human history isn't written down. It's told. So most of the rules we follow and the knowledge we rely on, whether in society at large or just in a workplace setting, aren't written down anywhere. We learn them through socialization with other people in our culture or with our work colleagues. And learning is at its core relational. It happens through that interaction of people, when people interact with one another, and knowledge is the product of those interactions. And that's why social systems have memories, what we often call institutional memory. Now, one of the downsides of institutional memory is that it makes it difficult to change practices in an organisation or for a culture to shift. Old ways of thinking and doing things get preserved long after they've stopped being useful or relevant. You can remove documents, you can issue new policies, you can write new laws, you can outline new practices, you can, in an organisation, you can shred records that might reveal the bad behaviours that happened in the past, but you can't so easily get people to stop talking about those things, or to talk differently about those things, or to think differently about those things. You can't shred their memories. The imprint of what came before is pretty stubborn and locked in. And institutional memory actually has an upside, which is fortunate. It preserves the knowledge that stops people repeating old mistakes. It protects practices that work. It gives context for why past decisions were made. In a broader sense, it stabilises culture by passing on norms and expectations. The unfortunate bit of that is if they're bad norms, then those bad norms get passed on. But it can provide us with shortcuts. Those shortcuts can get locked into institutional memories as well. Shortcuts are shared. Pitfalls are warned about. And this institutional memory can provide provide continuity when the leadership changes. And crucially for us, it provides accountability. When people remember what happened, good or bad, it becomes much harder for wrongdoing to stay buried. And that's why organisations that turn bad tend to leak. There's an institutional memory of that bad behaviour that can't be erased, and there are always enough decent people around, even in badly run organisations, who know right from wrong and will keep that memory alive. When they see wrongdoing, they speak up. Not necessarily to their managers. In a toxic organisation, that can be dangerous, especially if the bad actors are the managers. Instead, people talk to their colleagues, the colleagues they trust. They spread the word, and they make sure that the wrongdoing is known about. And sometimes they speak to people outside of the organisation, and maybe they speak to a journalist or two. Now, things are rarely truly hidden. They're only ever unspoken. And decent people will speak up. When they see an injustice, their first impulse is to make sure it's known about. Their second is to make sure it's talked about. They want to make sure it's remembered. And their third is to make sure it's acted on. The last step often means it's taken out of their hands. That's where the legal system comes in, and justice isn't always guaranteed at that point. It means that justice might not be served, but it does mean that the injustice will always be remembered. So in the Post Office scandal, documents eventually emerged because there were too many documents to destroy, and even if all the documents had been destroyed, there were too many people who'd lived through the events, who remembered what was done and were decent enough to speak out. And those people have ensured that the scandal won't be forgotten. And to sum up, what connects these two things, those executives and their reported loss of memory about how they had recalibrated their moral compass, and the retrieval of that contract that shows us all how mendacious and immoral they'd been? Well, I think it's all about those social forces, those cultural pressures that push on people, and how the people who should have pushed back didn't. Instead, they recalibrated their moral compass so that they could pretend to do the right thing, but ended up doing so much harm to so many people. And it's those social forces, that cultural pressure, that also, at the very same time, seared into the institution's memory all of those bad actors and their actions, all of those choices they made, all of that immorality they engaged with. Not just evident in the written records that were kept, that keep on resurfacing, but also in the shared memory of all those who lived through the scandal, all of those decent people who spoke up to make sure that records were kept, and none of this will be forgotten. Now let's wrap up. I've got to start on the next video. Do let me know your comments, what you think about my thoughts. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about all of this. The next video, just to let you know what the next video is, I'm planning to do, it's on robo-debt. I've promised this for a while, and a few of you have been asking this for a while, so I'm now going to get on to scripting that. But I've also got another video that might come before that one. We'll see how it goes, which is about my teaching. So the robo-debt one first. Robo-debt is this thing that's happened here in Australia, which has got big parallels with the Post Office scandal in the UK. So if you're interested in my Post Office scandal videos, look out for that one. But this other video that I'm scripting is a video about my teaching, specifically why I think we need to create the film look in our videos when we're teaching about such things as qualitative research and critical psychology, which is the area I focus on. So if you're interested in issues around learning and teaching, or qualitative research or critical psychology, that's one you might be interested in as well. So, hope to see you in one of those videos. Till then, ta-da.